Hello and welcome to our Diversity Curriculum Professional Development session for our EFD 645 class. My name is Mary Beth Gillen.
Hi, I'm Christy Towns.
And I'm Julie Tucker.
Hey, I'm Joseph Wadded.
And we're going to present our session for you today. All right, so we're going to talk about multicultural education and specifically in your classroom. Topics for our session today that we're going to cover is education that is multicultural, placing students at the center of teaching and learning, belief that all students can learn, and preparing to teach multiculturally.
During the course of today's session, we're going to discuss several things that are going to hopefully bring us to these learning outcomes. First of all, we want to be able to promote a classroom climate that supports cultural diversity. We want our classrooms to be a place where students feel free to be who they are. We're also going to build relationships with students to help them overcome academic and social weaknesses. We are going to be able to recognize that all students can learn when teachers care about them and hold high expectations for their academic achievement. We're going to be able to identify strategies for all students to be successful, and we're going to identify and implement lessons to support multicultural learning. So at the end of today's session, we hope that when you walk away, that these I can statements are truly something that you can implement in your classroom. Well, first of all, we need to talk about, before we get started, what is education that is multicultural? Multicultural education simply means equal educational opportunities for all students, including those from different racial, ethnic, and social class groups. It's not just about racial differences, even ethnic differences. As time has gone by, multicultural education has come to include many things. But what that needs to look like in the educational realm is that it should include respect for multiple cultural identities of students, support for equity and social justice, and we should allow in our classrooms students to maintain their own cultural identities in and out of school. In other words, students shouldn't have to feel like they have to conform to who we are when they come to our classroom. We should create an atmosphere that embraces differences and gives value to them so that students can actually learn from each other and appreciate their differences. The goal of multicultural education, like all other things we do in school, is optimal academic, social, physical, and emotional potential for students. We want them to reach the highest goal that they can set for themselves and the expectations that we set for them. So it sounds really great, but sometimes that can be hard in a classroom because we're bringing lots of different people with lots of different backgrounds together. So from the teacher's perspective, we really have to change our mindset. And I know that when I first began teaching, this was something that was hard for me. I mean, I think naturally we just expect everybody to be like us, but they're not. They come to our classes with different backgrounds, different cultures, now more so than ever. So for our mindset as a teacher, we have to be conscious that our beliefs and thinking and acting evolved from our own experiences. We are the way we are because what we've experienced in our lives, just like our students are who they are based on their experiences that they have brought to us to this point. And also, we need to validate those students' lives and cultures. Because they're different, sometimes I know, speaking personally, if I don't understand something, then I'm a little bit apprehensive of it. But the only way to kind of move past that is to validate the students' lives and cultures by making them feel included and important. It also makes our teaching more interesting if we can incorporate the diversity, equity, and different experiences of our students throughout the learning process. Not only are we learning the content that we have to teach, but when we bring different perspectives to the conversation, then we're not only teaching content, but we're addressing social, emotional needs in the process. The classroom, we need to remember, should be a model of democracy and social justice, which is the intention of the United States of America. And we need to promote that in our classrooms. And also, we need to confront barriers for equitable access to education. In other words, sometimes you just can't ignore the things that we know are keeping our students from learning. Sometimes you have to meet them head on, and in order to do that, you have to confront the things that are standing in the way of equity within the classroom. And the result, we hope, is that all students feel included, that everyone's bringing a unique experience in addition to your own to the classroom, and that the classroom is really a multicultural microcosm for what we want our whole nation to be. In other words, everyone has value that needs to be included in your classroom. And in order to do that, we have to change our mindset that our way is not always the only way.
And Christy, you're absolutely right. In order to do that, we really have to make our classrooms a student-centered classroom. And truly, the way that you do that, to begin to do that, is you have to get to know your students and who they are, and begin to try to understand their diversity and who they are as a student, in order to really and truly make their learning experience what it should be. So we're going to talk a little bit about how teachers get and keep your students motivated. And a lot of this centers around getting to know your kids that are sitting in front of you in your classroom. So we have just a few things up here on the screen. And some of these are things that you may have thought about before. And some of them may be new to you. So we'll just kind of look at a few of them here and there. Number one, being passionate about your subject and your work as a teacher. Teachers students are only going to be as excited as you are when you come into the classroom. If you are not excited about what you're doing, then why should they be? So I think it's really important as educators that I know that we can get frustrated, and I know things may not always go the way, and we're human too, and we bring our own personal things into the classroom every day. But I think it's really important that sometimes we stop and sometimes we check them at the door, and we remember that we have to show these kids why we do what we do, and we have to show our passion and and show them that we care about them. One thing that was important to me when I became a teacher, and especially as an administrator, as an assistant principal in my career, I remember I dealt with discipline so much that it was very easy to, kind of associate just what that kid had done with what they had gotten in trouble for, and that was who they were, and that was not it. Now, as a principal, I have really found myself trying to connect with kids on any level but school to a degree, so that I can try to make a connection with them. So it's important to really talk to kids, connecting to issues with students. Talk about things, try to have a 10-minute conversation with a student about anything but school, something going on outside of school. When you do that, when you start doing that, they really start to think, well, she may care about what's going on, and you actually you're going to learn about, well, maybe they don't have the resources, maybe there's something going on in the home that shouldn't be going on, so that you can really become, a help and for the student. So you can see the things that are on the screen. These are all different ways that you can get to know your students in important ways. So we have an activity And this is just something that you can use in your classroom. And you can use this in multiple different ways. I have done this before in my own classroom. I've seen this done in faculty meetings with faculty. It's really diverse itself, okay? And so you really just need some little packs of Skittles, and you do have to label, what the colors will represent for the activity. But then you can either partner up your students to where they are learning more about each other, or you can yourself be the partner with the class or with the faculty, and you can then begin to get to know your students. And you can actually do this for an actual lesson. If you're wanting to quiz students, you can do it in a fun way that way. But really and truly, this is one fun way that you can kind of get to know your class and your students there. And through that, you'll begin to see the diversity. You're going to see not just, racial diversity. You're going to be able to see culture. You're going to be able to see a lot of different things. And so this is just one way that it's easy to keep your students as the center of the classroom, and a way to get them to maybe open up to you as a teacher and to find out more about who they are.
I think the first thing you have to have is you have to understand that all students can learn. I know we see a lot of things today in the news, social media, and people, human nature, we develop stereotypes, and people will look at a certain type of person and think this is what I think they are. But as a classroom teacher, one of the first things that I always try to encourage teachers to do is to get to know your students. That takes time. I always encourage my faculty at the first of the year to spend those first couple of days really just getting to know your students. I really like the activity that Julie showed. I think that's a great way to do that, to kind of start developing those relationships, letting the students understand and know that you care about them, not only as a student, but also as a person. And I feel like when you establish those kind of relationships with kids, then that's when I think you can really set your expectations for what they can do in the classroom. So some questions to really guide your differentiating curriculum. When you think about, okay, all students can learn, what do I need to be doing in the classroom? When you look at your curriculum, is this geared towards supporting students' learning styles? We all understand that we all learn different. Some people do better with writing assignments. Some people may do better in group work. So really, what are we doing to activate all the students' different types of learning? How does the curriculum incorporate students' lives? I think that's one that's very important as you look if you think about diversity. What are you doing to incorporate everybody's lives and things that they may see in their culture? What are my students' cultures, and how does the curriculum introduce students to ordinary role models? What does a role model look like in that culture? And really, if you think about those questions as you prepare lessons, I think we will naturally develop more diverse lessons because of those guiding questions. All right, the Center for Research on Education and Diversity has identified 5 standards as critical to improve the learning of diverse students. Number 1 is joint productive activity. You've heard us kind of reference today peer and group work. I think that's a great way to do that. And as a classroom teacher, as you're grouping your students, you can have control or you can let them pick. But if you're wanting to make sure you have diverse group with different learners and different needs, you can place those students how you want to. And I think that's a great way to do that. And that's going to incorporate and force those students to talk and work together. Number 2 is language development, and that's teaching literacy across all content areas. And I think that's something that sometimes it's hard for your math teachers to understand. It's hard for your science teachers to understand. It's not just your ELA teacher that we want teaching literacy. We want to do that across all content areas in our school. Number 3, contextualization. Connect the material to the students' lives. And again, for some classes, I think that is harder than other. A lot of times you'll have the students ask the questions, why are we doing this? So if you can find a way as a teacher to connect the material, your content, to their lives, as well as the different cultures, where they have the ability to make those real world connections, I think we have a lot better chance of engaging those students. Number 4 is complex thinking. all students have the ability to develop critical thinking skills. We all understand and know that our students are going to be at different levels, but they all do have the capacity and the ability to develop those thinking skills. And that's all in how we structure our lessons. Number 5, instructional conversation. Just good student conversation. That's your sharing, your questioning. What kind of depth of knowledge when you ask your questions are you using? And these are some things that I think if we do in our classrooms, that it'll give everybody the chance to learn. And again, we just always must understand that regardless of how people may view different things, that all students do have the ability to learn.
And now we need to talk about preparing to teach multiculturally. There are many things you need to do to be prepared to teach students or multiculturally. You need to know your own cultural identity. When I started doing this, I got to thinking, how well do I know my own cultural identity? In order to teach students with other cultural identities, you really need to know your own. You need to accept that you may have prejudice. As bad as people want to admit it, everyone has some sort of prejudice. A good teacher can recognize your biases. A good teacher knows that they're biased and they recognize, and as the next thing says, they develop strategies in order to overcome your bias. If you develop strategies, you're able to overcome those biases in order to teach all groups. And then the last thing, know your groups, know the groups that you can identify with. You can identify with other cultures. In my belief, I think you can identify with every culture in some way. Everyone, we all have something in common. So you need to know what you identify with the groups with. In the text, Multicultural Education, a Pluralistic Society, God can list 2 ways to teach multiculturally. To know yourself and others, and then to reflect on your practice. As a good teacher, I think you reflect on anything you do. So I can understand it very well why that's in here. But to know yourself and others, many times we do not think about things like that. The first one is, how much do you know about your culture? As I mentioned earlier, I got to thinking, how well do I know mine? As a teacher, we need to sit down and think about our own culture before we can learn to adapt and to identify with other cultures. Learn about other groups. You can read about other cultures. You can communicate with students. Get to know other groups. Know that you, as Ms. Towns mentioned at the very beginning, many times we think everyone is like us, but that's just not true. You need to learn about other groups and how you can identify with them. Interact with people from other cultures. As I mentioned, that's one way to learn about other groups. You just need to interact, ask questions, be interested in the other cultures. Even though they're not the same as you, there are things that you can still identify with. Examine the meaning of race. Truly know what the meaning of race means. You need to go into it knowing what race is and acknowledge that racism is real. As much as we hate to admit it, racism is real, and many students have to deal with racism, and we need to acknowledge that is real and something that these students have to deal with. And then to reflect on your practice, reflect on your practices in the classroom. I believe a good teacher does this in anything they do, but you need to think about how you're reaching these students of other cultures. Ask questions. Ask the things that they do in their cultures, or what might be affecting the way they're learning because of the ways they interact, or the things in their culture. Improve your own behavior, which I would also think any good teacher would do this. Know what you need to do to improve so that you can reach all these students. And then use students' cultures in your teaching. Especially if you're doing a lesson in history and you're learning about different cultures. Incorporate that into your teaching. Don't just discuss it, but actually bring it into the classroom. And then improve your teaching. Not only your behavior and how you interact with things, but improve your teaching. Change the way you do things to reach all the students. These are a list of our references that we used during this presentation.
And if you will, please complete this evaluation form. We thank you for being with us today. Our goal for you when you go back to your classroom is that maybe you've learned some strategies that will allow you to teach a multicultural classroom. And also we hope you have some things that as you get ready to prepare your lessons that you think about before you do that. Once again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.